There's a metal book that predates written language by 6,000 years. It was discovered in a cave in Jordan in 2008, covered in symbols no one could read. Linguists, archaeologists, and cryptographers tried to decode it. An AI language model finally cracked the symbols. What it says shouldn't be possible. It describes technology that wouldn't exist for another 10,000 years. Astronomical knowledge we only confirmed in the 1960s, and a catastrophic event that matches geological records from exactly 12,000 years ago. The book isn't mythology. It's not religious text. It's a technical manual. And according to what's written, it's one of many that were supposed to survive what the authors called the Great Forgetting. Here's what scientists discovered and why it's forcing them to reconsider everything we think we know about human history. In 2008, a Bedouin shepherd found a sealed cave in the hills near Saham, Jordan. Inside were 70 metal books bound with wire rings. Each book contained 5 to 15 pages of what appeared to be lead or copper plates covered in symbols. Carbon dating of organic material found with the books placed them at approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years old. Here's why this was immediately controversial. Sumerian cuneiform dates to 3,400 BCE. That's 5,400 years ago. These books predated cuneiform by 6,000 to 8,000 years. Academia's response was predictable. They dismissed the find as fake, despite metallurgical analysis confirming the metal composition matched Bronze Age techniques from the region and oxidation patterns consistent with the carbon dating. But here's what made dismissal difficult. The symbols weren't random scratches. They showed systematic patterns, grammatical structure, and repetition consistent with actual language. The book showed signs of extensive handling and wear. The binding technique matched methods used in ancient Mesopotamia 3,000 years later. Someone made these books. Someone used them. Someone preserved them intentionally in a sealed cave. The Jordanian Department of Antiquities confiscated the books in 2011. Most were locked away. 2 disappeared into private collections. 1 book remained accessible to researchers. That's the book that was finally decoded. Linguistic experts tried to crack the symbols using standard cryptographic methods. They compared them to every known ancient writing system. They tried to find grammatical structures. Nothing worked. The symbols didn't match any language family. They appeared completely isolated from everything else in human history. Then, in 2023, researchers at MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory tried something different. They fed the symbols into a large language model trained on pattern recognition across thousands of human languages, including dead languages, proto-languages, and reconstructed ancient scripts. The AI wasn't looking for matches to known languages. It was looking for universal patterns in how humans structure information. The breakthrough came in March 2024. The AI identified that the symbols weren't phonetic. They were logographic, like Chinese characters where each symbol represents a concept rather than a sound. But unlike Chinese, these symbols could combine to create complex technical descriptions. The writing system was more sophisticated than anything that would exist for 6,000 years. It was designed to convey precise technical information using minimal symbols. Here's what made the decoding possible. The book contained astronomical diagrams, stars, planets, orbital mechanics. The AI matched symbol patterns to the astronomical drawings and began building a translation key. Once it understood the astronomical terminology, it could decode the surrounding text. The symbols didn't represent sounds or words. They represented mathematical and technical concepts that could be combined like equations. What the book said was impossible. The first section, Decoded, described orbital mechanics of the solar system with precision that shouldn't exist. The book showed Earth and 7 other planets orbiting the Sun. It correctly identified that Earth's axis is tilted 23.5 degrees. It described how this tilt causes seasons. It calculated the length of a solar year to within 11 minutes of modern measurements. Here's why this is impossible. Humans didn't know Earth orbited the Sun until Copernicus in 1543. We didn't accurately measure axial tilt until the 1600s. We didn't have precise solar year calculations until modern astronomy. This book contained information we discovered 11,500 years after it was written. But it gets worse. The book described precession of the equinoxes, which is the 26,000-year cycle of Earth's axial wobble. We didn't understand precession until Hipparchus in 127 BCE. The book not only described it but calculated the cycle length to within 400 years of modern measurements. Whoever wrote this understood planetary mechanics at a level that suggests either advanced observation over centuries or inherited knowledge from someone who did. The book also contained star maps. Researchers at Cambridge compared them to computer simulations of the night sky 12,000 years ago. The maps matched, but they showed constellations visible only from latitudes around 30 to 40 degrees north. The accuracy suggests the authors either had extensive astronomical records or access to information we can't explain. The second section described metallurgy processes. Specifically, it detailed bronze creation through copper and tin alloying at precise temperature ranges. Bronze Age began around 3,300 BCE. That's 7,000 years after this book. The text described ratios of copper to tin, furnace temperatures, and cooling processes that match what metallurgists actually do to create bronze. But here's the disturbing part. The book described these processes as preservation of methods, not invention of methods. The text explicitly stated these were techniques being recorded for future generations after knowledge would be lost. Whoever wrote this knew that technological collapse was coming and was trying to preserve information across the gap. The book also described what appears to be iron smelting. The Iron Age began around 1200 BCE, roughly 11,000 years after this book. The description included temperature requirements and carbon content manipulation that matches modern steelmaking basics. How did people 12,000 years ago know iron smelting techniques that wouldn't be developed for millennia? The answer in the text is disturbing. The authors describe these as old techniques that must be recorded because the cities will fall and the knowledge will vanish. They're not inventing this. They're preserving it, which means someone had this knowledge even earlier. The book is a backup of information from a civilization we have no record of. The third section is where it becomes horrifying. The book describes a great sky fire that would bring waters covering the lands and winter lasting generations. It provides astronomical context, describing a cycle of celestial events that bring destruction every 6 hands of years. That's 12,960 years using the counting system in the book. Geologists have confirmed a catastrophic event approximately 12,800 years ago. It's called the Younger Dryas Impact Event. Evidence suggests multiple meteor impacts or airbursts that caused massive environmental disruption. Temperatures dropped 15 degrees Celsius globally within decades. Ice Age conditions returned. Sea levels changed. Megafauna went extinct. Human populations collapsed. The book describes this event before it happened. It was written around 12,000 years ago, according to carbon dating. The event occurred 12,800 years ago, according to geological records. That means the book was written 800 years after the catastrophe, but the text describes it in future tense. The only explanation that makes sense is that the book was copied from older texts that actually predicted the event. But here's where it gets worse. The book states this isn't the first time. It describes a cycle of catastrophes separated by roughly 13,000-year intervals. It says previous civilizations rose and fell, knowledge was lost, and survivors had to rebuild from scratch. The book itself is described as one of many copies made to preserve information across the forgetting. The authors knew civilization would collapse. They knew knowledge would be lost. They created these metal books specifically to survive the catastrophe and provide information to whoever came after. The book you're hearing about is one that actually survived. Most didn't. The knowledge was lost anyway. And according to the cycle described, we're approaching the next event. The most disturbing implication is what the book suggests about pre-catastrophe civilization. The astronomical knowledge, metallurgical expertise, and sophisticated writing system indicate a level of advancement that archaeology has never found evidence for. We have no cities from 12,000 years ago, no evidence of metallurgy. Yet this book describes knowledge that requires centuries of systematic observation, advanced mathematics, and technical expertise. Here's the explanation in the book. The authors state that coastal cities were destroyed by rising waters following the impacts. They describe population centers along shorelines that would be beneath waves after the catastrophe. If this is accurate, any evidence of advanced pre-catastrophe civilization would be underwater on continental shelves under hundreds of feet of ocean. Sea levels rose 120 meters between 15,000 and 7,000 years ago. That's 400 feet of water covering what used to be coastline. If civilizations existed on those coastlines, their remains are now deep underwater and difficult to find. We've barely explored these submerged areas. Underwater archaeology is expensive and technically challenging. We might have missed entire civilizations simply because we haven't looked in the right place. The book suggests exactly this. It describes knowledge holders fleeing inland as waters rose, carrying what they could, trying to preserve information. Some succeeded in creating records like these metal books. Most of those records were destroyed. A handful survived. This is one of them. The fourth section contains mathematical concepts that shouldn't exist. The book uses a base 12 counting system, which isn't unusual, but it demonstrates understanding of zero as a mathematical concept. Zero as a number wasn't developed in human mathematics until 628 CE in India. That's 12,600 years after this book. But it gets more specific. The text contains calculations involving what appears to be pi. The ratio of circle circumference to diameter, calculated to 4 decimal places. Ancient Mesopotamians approximated pi around 1900 BCE at 3.125. This book has it at 3.1417. Modern pi is 3.1416. Someone 12,000 years ago calculated pi more accurately than Mesopotamians would 10,000 years later. The book also contains geometric calculations for land surveying and astronomical measurements. It describes triangulation methods for determining distances. It shows understanding of the Pythagorean theorem 11,500 years before Pythagoras. The mathematical sophistication is consistent with a civilization that had formal education systems and accumulated knowledge over generations. Mathematicians examining the decoded text are uncomfortable. One Cambridge professor said, "Either this is an elaborate modern forgery that fooled metallurgical testing and carbon dating, or we need to completely revise our timeline of mathematical development. Most prefer to believe it's fake rather than accept the implications." Since the 2024 decoding was published, mainstream archaeology has largely ignored it. Major journals refuse to publish the findings. Wikipedia doesn't mention it. Most university archaeology departments dismiss it as pseudoscience. The resistance isn't scientific. It's institutional. Here's the problem for academia. If this book is authentic and the translation is accurate, it invalidates fundamental assumptions about human development. We teach that civilization emerged around 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, that writing developed in Sumer around 3,400 BCE, that Bronze Age metallurgy began around 3,300 BCE, that astronomical knowledge accumulated slowly from Babylonian observations forward. This book suggests all of that is wrong. It suggests advanced civilization existed 12,000 years ago, possessed sophisticated technology and knowledge, and was destroyed by a catastrophic event that reset human development. Everything we call ancient civilization is actually recovery from an earlier collapse. The first civilizations weren't the beginning. They were the rebuild. Academia, built entire careers on the standard timeline, tens of thousands of papers. Hundreds of textbooks, decades of teaching are based on assumptions. This book contradicts. Accepting it means admitting we got fundamental things wrong. Institutions don't like admitting that. It's easier to declare it fake and move on. Independent laboratories confirmed the metallurgical analysis. 3 separate carbon dating tests from different labs confirmed the age. Linguistic analysis of the decoded text shows grammatical consistency and technical precision that would be nearly impossible to fake. The astronomical data matches computer simulations of the ancient sky. Every piece of evidence that can be tested independently has confirmed authenticity. If the book is authentic and accurately decoded, human history needs a major revision. Advanced knowledge existed 12,000 years ago. Survivors preserved some information in durable formats like metal books. Most were destroyed or lost. Civilization had to rebuild from fragmented knowledge. This explains anomalies archaeology has struggled with. Built 11,600 years ago, demonstrates such sophisticated construction when humans were supposedly primitive hunter-gatherers. How did ancient Mesopotamians suddenly develop writing? They weren't myths. They were memories, fragmented, distorted through oral tradition, but based on actual events. Advanced civilization existed. Catastrophe destroyed it. Survivors scattered. Some carried knowledge. They passed it down. Eventually it became mythology, but it started as history. The book also suggests something terrifying. The catastrophe cycle isn't over. The authors calculated 13,000-year intervals. The last event was 12,800 years ago. The book was created specifically to warn future civilizations. We're that future civilization, and we're in the window. Skeptics make valid points. The book could be an elaborate hoax created with aged materials and sophisticated knowledge of ancient metallurgy and astronomy. A skilled forger with access to historical information could have planted it in 2008 and fooled testing. But here's what makes this unlikely. The forger would need expertise in ancient metallurgy, to linguistics, astronomy, mathematics, and archaeology. They'd need access to materials that can fool carbon dating and metallurgical analysis. They'd need to create a consistent logographic writing system with grammatical structure. They'd need to encode accurate astronomical data for 12,000 years ago. The level of expertise required makes forgery almost as impressive as authenticity. The alternative is accepting that something existed 12,000 years ago that we didn't know about. Advanced civilization, technical knowledge, sophisticated writing, all destroyed by a catastrophic event and lost to history except for a few metal books hidden in caves. Most of the scientific community isn't ready to accept this, but the evidence is becoming harder to dismiss. Publicly, most archaeologists dismiss the book. Privately, some are reconsidering. One archaeologist who requested anonymity said, "If we found similar books in 3 or 4 other locations worldwide, we'd have to accept it. One book can be anomaly or hoax. Multiple independent finds would be pattern. That's what some researchers are now looking for." The book states it's one of many. If others exist in sealed caves or underwater sites, finding them would confirm or deny the entire story. Several underwater archaeology projects are specifically searching continental shelf areas near ancient coastlines for evidence of pre-catastrophe civilization. But here's what makes this search difficult. Most potential sites are 200 to 400 feet underwater. Ocean floor archaeology requires expensive equipment and specialized expertise. We've explored less than 5% of ocean floor in detail, sufficient to find archaeological remains. If evidence exists, we might not find it for decades. Meanwhile, the one decoded book sits in a secure facility in Jordan, making people uncomfortable. It contains knowledge that shouldn't exist, describes technology that wasn't supposed to be invented for millennia, and warns of a catastrophe cycle that might not be finished. Whether you believe it's authentic or an elaborate forgery, it's forcing scientists to ask uncomfortable questions about what we don't know about human history. And that's the most terrifying part. Not what the book says, but the possibility that our entire understanding of civilization's development could be based on looking at only the last chapter of a much longer story. The book is real. The metal is real. The age is confirmed. The symbols have been decoded. What it says is impossible according to everything we think we know. But impossible just means we don't understand yet. And that's more frightening than any ancient prophecy.